Okay, that was my grandfather clock that was bonging 7. So. Okay, I think we're about ready. Okay. I'd like to welcome everyone to a public forum, Community Relations and Law Enforcement in Oxford. I'm Sandy Roy Hazelton, and I'm co-president for program of the Oxford League of Women Voters. This is going to be our first virtual meeting, and bear with us. We're sort of hoping that because we're going to get used to this platform, that we're exploring how we can outreach in terms of using this technology. We have the opportunity of actually meeting and reaching more people, but we're missing the personal interaction that we're used to. This evening's panel is being recorded, and if you missed some of it, it will be available later on YouTube. The forum is being sponsored by League of Women Voters of Oxford and co-sponsored as well by the Interfaith Center at Miami University and the NAACP of Oxford. Okay, earlier this summer, our community leaders, Mayor Smith of the city, President Crawford of Miami University, and the NAACP President Fran Jackson, presented a joint message which recognized systemic racism in our society. And they called for our community to come together, to focus on our core values, and those core values that define us. And the values that were mentioned were recognizing diversity, inclusion, transparency, and good communication. Now, these values are important for good relations among individuals, but they're especially essential when we are looking at interactions between figures of authority and citizens. So the catalyst for having this and looking at this issue has been the spotlight of the disproportionate miscarriage of justice that has been perpetrated on people of color by law enforcement throughout the United States. The most recent example was in Kenosha, Wisconsin last week. So what does this have to do with our community? How will we know what our concerns are, and what means do we have to address those concerns, and what can be done? Well, tonight's panel hopes to give the citizens of Oxford a better idea of how our community supports equity, diversity, inclusion, transparency, and good communication. It also seeks to identify the challenges that we face in achieving these goals, where we fall short, and what we can do to address the deficiencies. Our panelists this evening include 2 members of the Police Community Relations Review Commission, Pat Meade, who is also a member of the Talawanda School Board, Dr. Amber Franklin, who is also a faculty member at Miami University, Nicole Newsome, who is a co-leader of Black Lives Matter Oxford and is currently a senior at Miami University, the Reverend Vanessa Cummings, who represents the NAACP of Oxford. She's a longtime community member, activist, has been a staff member at Miami University, and also served on Oxford's City Council. And finally, we have Chief John Jones, who is the head of the Oxford Police Department. So each of our panelists will give a 5-minute presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. So for the first part, all the attendees, you've been muted and you won't be able to speak, but we want you to participate in the second portion, and our moderator, technical moderator, Kathy Brinkman, she will be watching, and if you raise your hand, and that is on the your device on the lower screen, you have an opportunity to say that you'd like to ask a question. At that point, she will unmute you, and you have to make sure that your microphone is on, and then you can ask the question to the panelist. If you don't want to do this verbally, you can use the Q&A icon and write a question. Kathy will then ask the question to the panelists. So we really want everybody to participate. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panelists and hear their presentations. And first, I'm going to turn to Pat and Amber. We'd like to hear a little bit about the Police Community Relations Review. I thought it was board, but it's commission. And I hope that our viewers, the attendees to this, know that such a commission exists. There was a great article in the Oxford Press yesterday. They've been reaching out, and we're going to hear tonight what it is that they do. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandy. I'd like to thank the League for having this forum. I think it's really important in Oxford to continue these discussions and to let citizens know what the city's doing. I also want to thank everybody who showed up to listen in and the other panelists who are giving up their time. I've lived in Oxford 48 years, and one of the questions Sandy asked in the email to me was, how did this commission start? She kind of wanted a little history. A lot of people may not be aware of how long it's been around. Oxford had a police advisory board back in the day. But what happened is, and I have to preface this, that I'm going to say some things that seem kind of negative, but that doesn't reflect my experience of 41 years when this started, of policing in Oxford, and the many things I heard about policing in Oxford. They're the good way out, numbers the bad. However, I'm starting out with the history and it seems kind of negative. When this started was the NAACP actually had a forum on policing at the Lebanon Bank upstairs back in the fall of 2013. And I happened to go to that meeting, and the head of Miami Police Department was there, and one of our lieutenants, who's now retired, was there. And I sat in the back and I listened to people get up and talk about their experiences of policing in Oxford. And it became blatantly clear to me that my experience of policing in Oxford was different than what they were describing. Now, of course, they were describing some of the negatives. There was some positive, but a lot of people were describing some of their feelings. And it became apparent to me that at least the Black community felt they were being policed differently. My Black neighbors spoke about being profiled and being treated with disrespect. And these were men and women, young, middle-aged, old. Some were students, but some of them were members of families that, if I named their names, their families have been here forever. And they would stand up and just share these little stories. They were not horrendous stories, but they were stories that sort of said to me, there must be some bias going on, because this isn't my experience or the people I know's experience of policing. These people were not angry. They talked as if this was sort of just the price of being Black in the Midwest or something. There was not a lot of anger and rage. And there was a lot of positive comments as well. I need to reinforce that. There were positive comments. Well, after that meeting early the next spring, and I've told this story to many people, but it's kind of the story that made things click in my head. A student of mine described to me an incident where at 4 p.m, the 16-year-old young man is walking home in Southern Knolls. He tells me he gets stopped by an Oxford police officer who wants to know who he is, why he's there, where he's going. And he told me he felt as if he was being told he didn't belong, that he wasn't welcome in his own neighborhood. And I kind of said, well, that doesn't sound like it's right. And he said something to me that really cut me to the core. He said, Mr. Meade, you could shoot me and get away with it. My life doesn't matter. All right. This was before the phrase Black Lives Matters was in the lexicon, so to speak. And I thought, well, after hearing the NAACP meeting and hearing this story, I was a member of what was then the Human Rights Commission, which is now the Civil Rights Commission. And we dealt with complaints about people who felt they were discriminated against in jobs and housing, et cetera. Well, we entered into a discussion about what happens if someone wants to complain about the Oxford Police Department. And we began a discussion and started talking about, well, maybe we needed a separate commission because that would take a lot of time. You'd have to become more experts on policing. You'd have to do a lot more research. And so the Human Rights Commission kind of decided we needed a separate commission. So we started working on an ordinance. And this was in the spring of 2014. And that discussion went on the rest of that year. In January of 2015, as I look back at minutes of the meeting, Chief Holsworth was at the Human Rights Commission. I think Lieutenant Jones joined us maybe at that meeting too. And we continued that discussion with the police department becoming involved. And that was in January of 2015. It wasn't until December of 2015 that the ordinance that had been written was passed by City Council. And I kind of bring that up because it took over 18 months from the time people started working on saying, let's form this commission to have oversight, and we came up with relations and review. It took 18 months to get it going. And that's a long time. There was nothing serious going on. The starting of this conversation predates Michael Brown. It was very like not responding to a crisis. It was trying to get ahead of the thing. But so the commission was established. We had our first meeting in February of 2016. The second question you asked me, Sandy, was the goals of the commission. And those are right in the top of the ordinance. And they are to improve communication between the community and the police department, to increase police accountability and credibility, to have a fair and impartial complaint process, and to advise the chief of police in the city on all matters relating to policing in the community and public perception of Oxford Police Department. So we started in February of 2016. We're now in February, we're in the end of 2020 or almost the last part of 2020. During this time, we've reviewed training, we reviewed hiring practices, we've talked about bias. And one of the things we realize is to get it bias and what's going on is we needed data. And so the commission and the police department have worked on what data can we get to either show what problems exist or to show that problems don't exist. And we have some evidence to show that there isn't that much bias or there isn't any bias in Oxford policing. And so we've been working on getting data, and I know that it was, I believe, February 2017 is the first time in our minutes that I see we asked for pedestrian stop data, field contact data, which I think the Black Lives Matter group will talk about later. So we've been asking for that since 2017. And then this summer, when the protests swept the nation after the murder of George Floyd, the murder of Breonna Taylor, there were several protests right here in Oxford, including, in my memory of being here in Oxford, the largest uptown gathering for a protest ever that was organized by Latricia Hillman. And I think the city became kind of grateful that we have this police commission to help citizens in the city process through what is it do we need to do to take something that is basically good in Oxford. Policing in Oxford is basically good. But how do we improve that, and how do we improve the community perceptions and community relations? And I think the city is now pretty happy that we had the foresight to put this commission in place. Now, a quick plug, just in case it doesn't get mentioned, tomorrow at City Council, we will be giving to the city our yearly report that we have to provide to them once a year. Those reports are on the website if you go to the police commission. Also on the website is the yearly data report that Chief Jones provides to us, which each year, we're getting a little more as we all learn what's needed in things. So I invite you to look at the website, and I invite you to tune in to City Council tomorrow. And I think Amber's going to take up the other questions that Sandy asked us to cover.
Yes. Thank you very much, Pat. Amber.
Yes, okay, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to speak tonight. So the first, I want to start talking a little bit about who makes up the PCRRC. So we comprise 7 members. 6 of us have no background in law enforcement, and 1 member does. However, what qualifies all of us to be on this civilian commission is that we're all residents of Oxford who care, who our local police have sworn to protect and serve. And we all care about having a safe, healthy, and thriving community for everyone, and that includes residents, students, visitors, and police officers alike. Before I get to the issues that we're facing and the goals of the commission, I want to address a few things and a few of the important features of our commission, some of which Pat alluded to a little earlier. So first of all, it's somewhat unusual, I think, for a police commission to exist in a town of this size. And this commission was formed outside of a cataclysmic crisis. Most commissions in larger municipalities are formed in response to police shootings, uprisings and riots, federal oversight and consent decrees with the Department of Justice. But the formation of our commission in the absence of these high-profile events, I think speaks to the forward-thinking nature of our community. And in that way, I think that we can be a model for other smaller municipalities, even as we work to improve the functioning of our own commission. Concerns over police interactions with the Black community, as you heard, are what motivated the commission's formation. And they're the concerns that have brought us here today. However, we're also here to be a voice for anyone who might feel marginalized in their interactions with law enforcement. And over the past 4.5 years, we have been able to learn a great deal from Chief Jones directly about the functions of the Oxford Police Department. And I think that having conversations and meetings with the chief and with some lieutenants who also live in Oxford and who are our neighbors, in fact, is a positive feature of being on a commission in a small municipality. One of the challenges that we've experienced was making the community aware of our existence, first of all, and this is especially challenging in a college town where there's a lot of high turnover among our students. Another challenge is that we have a lot of different layers of policing here in Oxford, right? There's the Oxford Police, there's the Miami University, there's Township, there's Sheriff. And so we engage with Oxford Police, but not with other departments. And so some of the experiences that residents might have that are negative with policing might fall outside of sort of our jurisdiction in terms of who we review and who we try to form relations with. Another challenge has been creating a format where people feel safe filing complaints against the police without fear. So right now, the format for filing an official complaint requires you to have that complaint notarized, and then you file it directly with OPD. And sometimes that extra step of formality might deter some people from filing a complaint and may actually give the perception that it doesn't make sense to file a complaint for anything less than excessive force. And so the Oxford Police Department and the city, they're working with us now on trying to find a way to make a more accessible complaint process that can also be filled out anonymously if people have concerns. And we know that those anonymous complaints cannot necessarily be used for disciplinary action against police officers, but we're hoping that they can tell something about patterns that might need to be addressed that can change some elements of culture, perhaps, if there is a problem. So far, we have, as a commission, reviewed two of the Black Lives Matter proposed initiatives, and I know Nicole is going to address some of those initiatives more specifically, and I understand there was a write-up in the Oxford Press about that last meeting. One of the initiatives that they proposed had to do with reducing barriers to filing complaints. So asking our officers to give a business card with perhaps a QR code that would take the individual to the PCRRB, to the commission, to file complaints. And the other commission had to do with more comprehensive and publicly available reporting of traffic stops, which we do now have. We got our first data set of officer-initiated traffic stops. And one of the things that I will be paying attention to, and I know that we're looking at, is there was a disparity in terms of stops with African Americans, to the extent that African Americans represent about 4.5% of the Oxford population, but represented 11% of officer-initiated traffic stops. And when you're working with numbers that small, sometimes it's hard to look at that as perhaps disparity. And we don't necessarily expect that every interaction with law enforcement is going to map directly onto census data. But we do want to look a little further into those data and find out, if there's any disparity in what people are being stopped for. We also don't necessarily know whether the people being stopped are Oxford residents or are passing through. But that's the first iteration of officer-initiated traffic stops, and we'll be hoping to collect data on field contacts at some point as well. And I know that Chief Jones is looking into some ways that the field contact data might be implemented. And I know Nicole's going to talk about the third resolution, which has to do with researching and funding alternatives to traditional policing here in Oxford. So finally, I want to end with one of the challenges that I've found is a balancing act that exists between the concept of police relations and police review. And I think that the title of the commission can sometimes send an ambiguous message to people. So most of what we've done so far over the past 4.5 years has to do with education and relations. So we've learned a lot about how OPD functions. We've given out a lot of ice cream at the police community picnic that happens usually in the fall. Unfortunately, it's not happening this year. But I'm finding that the renewed push from the public for more police transparency and accountability is stretching the commission in new and positive directions. And so to that effect, I know that one of our goals is going to be to review and strengthen the ordinance, which I know Mr. Meade will address at the City Council meeting tomorrow. So I hope you can attend.
Thank you very much, Amber. And we'll now hear from Nicole. As was mentioned, her organization really spearheaded the marches in the wake of George Floyd's murder. But they followed up, and their efforts have been meaningful and purposeful. They're looking for transformative changes in community relations, and they've presented City Council with some very specific recommendations and changes that they'd like to see in the processes and procedures. And we'd like to hear more about that. So, Nicole.
All right, thank you so much, Sandy. So, hello everyone. My name is Nicole Newsome, and I am a senior at Miami University. I am speaking on behalf of Black Lives Matter Oxford, where I serve as a co-leader. Since this past May, we have been working to increase racial equality in the Oxford community and to identify ways of supporting and protecting our most marginalized community members. Thus far, we've held protests, participated in town halls and community meetings, and we are currently working with PCRRB and Miami's Department of Family Science and Social Work on recommendations for Oxford Police Department to conduct more equitable and effective policing that reflects the values and needs of the community. Our Oxford Community Relations, or OCR, subgroup presented their letter of recommendations to Oxford City Council on Tuesday, August 4th. Those recommendations are as follows: require comprehensive reporting, remove barriers to reporting police misconduct, and a resolution to research and fund alternatives to traditional policing. These recommendations, along with their action steps, were passed to PCRRB to review and endorse before returning to Oxford City Council for further review and voting. At the last PCRRB meeting on Thursday, August 20th, the Commission voted to support our first proposal to require comprehensive reporting. As far as I understand it, they will now request that the City Council give OPD 6 months to provide field data, including pedestrian stops, to the PCRRB. Regarding our second proposal, while nothing was definitively decided, I do want to note that the specific language around removing barriers to reporting police misconduct actually focused on a recommendation that officers carry and provide personalized business cards that would include a link and QR code to file an anonymous complaint to people who are stopped. While we appreciate Chief Jones's work to make the complaint system more accessible, we believe that the best way to make sure that people can file a complaint or recommendation is to provide that information at the point of transaction when the person is stopped. Given the fact that OPD officers already have personalized business cards, we believe that adding a brief line requesting feedback accompanied by a website link and QR code and mandating that officers hand out the cards at each stop would be a simple addition that can have a monumental impact on our community. We also support removal of the notary requirement, which is currently required for filing formal complaints. Removing the notary system will result in more community members coming forward when there are problems and will show that OPD and its union care about making communication in Oxford a priority. I have one final note on the first proposal. We're grateful that PCRRC voted in favor of requiring OPDs to submit field data. However, a 6-month time frame is a long time. When the PCRRC was founded several years ago, they asked for that information and was not provided. If OPD values transparency, we believe it is perfectly reasonable for City Council to shorten that time frame and ask that OPD submit comprehensive field data, including pedestrian stops, to the PCRRC within 3 months. If you agree, there is a City Council meeting tomorrow evening at 7:30. If you're able to make it, please share your thoughts during the public comments portion of the meeting and let them know that 6 months is too long to wait. Lastly, I would like to thank the League of Women Voters, the Interfaith Center, the PCRRC, and the many community members and local organizations that have been supportive of the work we are doing in Oxford. We look forward to continuing to work with all of you. Thank you for your consideration.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicole. And now I'd like to turn to Reverend Vanessa Cummings. You know, you've been an Oxford resident for a long time. You've seen much of this developing over the years. Could you please give us a background on what you see as the greatest challenges and the concerns that NAACP has identified and those types of things in terms of improving community relations and law enforcement in Oxford from your perspective? Thank you.
I'd be glad to. Thank you very much and good evening. And I want to say thank you to the League and Interfaith for the work that you're doing in NAACP, partnering with you all in making this forum a reality. We've all been working to get the community talking more so that we can all share our concerns and open the dialogue where the community will be more comfortable talking openly and asking questions, and we can begin to break down these barriers and address issues that are occurring that have to deal with racial injustice. One of the things I want to share is the objectives of the NAACP, and that is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of all citizens, to achieve equality of rights and eliminate race prejudice among the citizens of the United States, to remove all barriers of racial discrimination through democratic processes, to seek enactment and enforcement of federal, state, and local laws securing civil rights, to inform the public of the adverse effects of racial discrimination and to seek its elimination, to educate persons as to their constitutional rights, and to take all lawful action to secure the exercise thereof, and to take any other action lawful in furtherance of these objectives consistent with the NAACP's Articles of Incorporation and the Constitution. And I know that's a lot of information, but to put it in a nutshell, our concern is to make sure that the political, educational, social, and economic equality of all citizens occurs without regard to race, and that any issues of discrimination are addressed and that the barriers are torn down so that people have equal access and equal rights at all levels in all areas of government and just in society in general. The Oxford NAACP was the leader in the formation of the Police Community Relations and Review Commission. Prior to its creation, as they shared, there was a police advisory board, which was primarily there to serve as a place for the police to update what they were doing, but it didn't really have a lot of teeth to it, and that's the reason why this new commission was formed. And Pat Meade, who's a member of the NAACP, was instrumental in helping us to make that happen. The greatest challenges that we have right now is for people to be comfortable coming forward and addressing their concerns, addressing the needs, If there are problems that are happening, they need to know they can come to this commission and share their concerns. Some people may not be comfortable filing their complaint with the police department first, especially people of color. Our first thought is not, well, let me go file a complaint with the people who I have the complaint against. So we need to make sure that if people take a complaint to the commission first, instead of going to the police, that we can navigate those waters so that that still can be looked at and the police can be informed, but that the community knows that they have an avenue to go to that's going to listen to them and receive their complaints, and they won't be as fearful of retaliation. We do have two police departments. We've got the city police department and we've got the university police department. So it's important that people understand the jurisdiction issues and understand who has control in what areas, and understand the mutual aid agreements that go between the two departments, because there are times they partner together. And, you know, with Amber shared that Blacks make up about 4% of the population, 11% of the stops. That may not seem that great a deal, but at the same time, to me, it jumps out as a big number, because having grown up here, I've seen the things that have happened. I've been a victim of the police department here in Oxford. When I was on city council, I was harassed by the police department. Now there's a new chief in town. I'm glad we have the new chief we have. I've known him for a number of years, and it was under a prior administration, not his administration. So I want to make that clear. This chief has done well as far as I've been seeing so far, and I'm sure that he will, and he listens, and he's attentive to hearing the needs of the community. So the biggest challenges we see is making sure that people know there's an avenue to report concerns, and making sure they know that when they share those concerns, they're going to be listened to. Because people who have a history here, the history is not good. When they file complaints, the complaints didn't go anywhere. And typically there were what amounted to excuses made for the conducts that were complained about. And so if people have that history, we need to help them to know that they can come forward now and things are not going to be handled the way they were in the past. But we have to make sure that that barrier is broken down, because I can tell you, people who know the legacy here and who have lived the legacy here that I have lived and that I have personally experienced and witnessed, they're not going to say, well, just go back and report your complaint to the police department. They're going to look at it, it's a new day. That's nice to say, but right now that's not the climate that we're in. And then we also need to know, excuse me, what's going to happen when somebody calls the police department to use the police department as a means of harassment and discrimination. It's happened on campus. When I was working on campus, it happened numerous times. People called and said there was a suspicious person in the building, and the person in the building worked at the building. But the police were called because the person working there who called didn't know the man, so they assumed he didn't belong. And people calling about somebody being at the library that looked out of place. It's a student at the library, but because it was a Black student at King Library, they looked out of place. So how is that going to be handled now when those types of things happen? Because we have higher up government who is encouraging people to utilize law enforcement to harass people. So those are the things that we're dealing with now. And my final quick thought is that we want to continue these dialogues, and we plan to continue these conversations, and we want community members to be a part of the planning process for this, so that these dialogues are taken on and led by the community and spearheaded by the community. So if there are community members who would like to be a part of future conversations and helping to put those together, I think the best thing to do at this point is to put it in the Q&A and just put down that you'd like to volunteer, and then we can reach out to you to get additional information, because we do want this to be a community conversation led by the community, so that we can begin to talk. We set the example for how other communities need to work. And if we're talking and we're working together and we're taking the lead, we're going to make sure something's done.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Now we'd like to turn to Chief Jones, and could you give us some indication of what the steps that you've been taking, that you have taken, and your commitment in terms of treating all citizens justly and equitably? I know you're working on better communications with the community. So what do you see as your major targets, the objectives you have for change at this point?
Well, sure. Thanks, Sandy. And thanks to all the other panelists, and thanks, Vanessa. That took me way back to when I first met you as a student here. You know, when thinking about Mr. Meade's story about a 16-year-old Black male getting stopped and the lens that he's seeing that through, you know, that's not how we want anyone to feel in Oxford. You know, the police, we have a job to do, and we have, you know, we do have to make stops, but it's certainly not how we view ourselves as having that bias. And our officers look for behavior and articulable facts, but it's important to keep that history in mind and how we approach the situation. So I think a lot of times our officers think they're in a consensual contact with someone, and they view it possibly as a positive interaction, but we may not understand the lens that that person's looking through, and who views it as a stop and a negative interaction. So I'll just say our values rise above that, and we do want to engage in bias-free policing. But that's important for us to continue to work with the PCRRC and the NAACP and the groups here in town to not have that happen. So we've been taking a critical look at ourselves and how we police. As Pat mentioned, you know, I've been working with PCRRC since when I became chief, or really before I became chief, back in 2016. And it has been an educational process on both ends, and how do we work together, because this group wasn't here before me. So we've been working to educate on policing and how we interact. We talk about data and all the data we provide and what we put on our website. But I kind of, you know, I want to get to the root of those interactions, and we have body cameras to dig into those deeper. So, you know, our officers, many of them are community members. We love our community. We love living in Oxford. It's a diverse community. We do a variety of things. We've tried to connect with the student population, but as Amber mentioned, it's a challenge because it's an ever changing student population. But we do that through, you know, some of our community outreach programs. We do it through journalism classes, and many of the students who come in and see us and try to engage. We want to continue to work with PCRRC and try to reach some of the goals that have been set. As it's been mentioned, we do some of those things that the Black Lives Matter group has brought to us with the business cards. And now we're just here, we're looking at what they're proposing and how do we improve that? What do we change our language to on our business card? We need to present those on stops. And the data, how do we collect that data? And, you know, data is kind of junk in, junk out. So we want to make sure we're collecting accurate data. And the traffic stop data that's been alluded to, this is our first year collecting that. And I have already seen some issues with how we're collecting the data and how can we improve that, and things that we left off of when we started collecting it. We collect it for a whole calendar year, so the data that I presented was kind of incomplete, and we, you know, we'll be looking at that harder too. So I think overall we're a very progressive police department, and we work very well with our community. We listen to our community. We do a lot to communicate with our community, whether that be attending groups like the Rotary Club or the Lions Club or the Kiwanis, or whether that be on social media, where we have a very active social media sites and try to connect to full-time residents and then students. And then we get a lot of two-way communication with that. We get a lot of private messages for that. So we're a small department. There's not that many officers actually patrolling. So that's a challenge for us to continue to provide a level of service with limited staff. But that's what we want to do. We want to hear our community, respond with the community, and we really want everyone in this community to feel safe. And if someone has a problem, I want them to be able to come to my office and meet with me. I'm very open to meeting with citizens and responding to them via email or taking a phone call from them. But I understand not all citizens are going to feel comfortable doing that. So that's what the PCRRC has helped with. And I've already seen that. And so I just want to continue to find those ways to engage with them. So thank you.
Okay, now we'd like to open it up to all the attendees. This is your opportunity to ask questions of the panelists. Kathy will be moderating this. You can ask your questions by raising your hand or by typing the question on the Q&A, and Kathy will read it to the panelists. It looks like we already have 2 questions, so I'll turn it over to you, Kathy.
Yeah, I'm going to take things in the order in which they came. So we have 2 attendees who raised their hand, and then we had 2 questions typed in. So if people will continue to take those actions while we start off. So Sally, there's no last name shown here. It just says Sally. Asked to unmute. Sally, if you can unmute yourself, then you can ask your question. I've sent the request to you to unmute. Okay, let's go. We'll come back to you. Let me go to Steve. Hang on 1 second. Steve Franklin. If you want to unmute.
That's my father.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I did not have a question.
oh, okay. That's okay.
Just want to commend them on the work.
Let's see. I'm going to lower your hand. Sally, are you? Okay, let's go to the written questions. An anonymous person asked, is being concerned that someone looks out of place regardless of race now considered harassment? If so, how should people handle their concerns? Looks like Nicole.
Okay. So I wrote down kind of a response to this. And so what I kind of wrote down was, I'd say that the first step is to assess why you feel that person looks out of place. Because unconscious racial bias is embedded in how we are socialized in an inherently white supremacist nation and world. And I make sure to say unconscious because many people exhibit racial bias without realizing or meaning to. And this is why it is crucial for people to do introspection and to see where you harbor implicit racial bias and to actively and intentionally do the work to become anti-racist. Because when you think of the community that we are in, there's not very many suspicious people, I would think, within the Oxford community. So I think it's really important that we're assessing that even though maybe you're not looking at race, like race is embedded in how we think about everything, whether we want to or not. That's how complex it is. So I would definitely say start there. And then come back, and if somebody's doing something crazy, then we can talk about that, because that's what Chief Jones is for.
Okay, thank you. Another anonymous question, and that is, would you please define systemic racism? Who would like to take that on? Amber?
I'll take some of that. Yeah. So systemic racism is racism that is institutionalized and that occurs across all levels of society in sort of normal everyday interaction. And it's foundational to this society. So systemic racism exists in healthcare and policing, in education, in business practices, and the historical nature of racism is such that it becomes compounded with every generation, right? So not being able to have generational wealth because of redlining, right? Where you couldn't get loans to live in certain neighborhoods means that there's less wealth to pass down to your children and their children. And so it creates these disparities that widen over time. One of the things that I think is interesting is that if those who are listening want to Google groundwater training, that is training that actually our own police department sent one of our lieutenants to. Lieutenant Robinson attended groundwater training in early August. And the principles behind groundwater training is that it uses the metaphor of the groundwater being poisoned as something that affects all the lakes in an area, and that we really have to address the toxic nature of the groundwater. And so systemic racism, if you look at that analogy, it's sort of like toxic groundwater.
And I would just add to what she shared, some people who still say, well, I don't get it. Just to give you an example of one of the pieces of systemic racism that's financial is when I was working at a certain Midwestern university, I won't name, there was disparity in the salaries that were paid. I was paid several $1,000s less than my white male counterparts. I was certified in the industry. I was qualified, but they kept justifying why they had to pay the white male more than they paid me. And that goes back to the systemic racism that occurs where, for instance, Blacks make 60% or 65% of what their white counterparts make. So for instance, if somebody's making $100,000 and they take home 65% of that on average after deductions, they're taking home $65,000. If I'm working beside them and I'm only making $65,000, I'm taking home 65% of that $65,000. So I'm taking home $45,000, they're taking home $65,000. So right there, we're working in the same job in the same place, making different salaries, can't live in the same neighborhoods, can't qualify for the same loans because we don't have the same income. But yet we're doing the same job or very similar jobs with the same titles in the same organization. That's what systemic racism looks like. And that's personal for me because I've experienced it. And so it's important, if you say, I still don't understand it, we all understand dollars and cents. If you make $1 an hour and a Black person beside you makes 65 cents an hour, that's systemic racism. And that means the wealth I build is less than the wealth that you build, which means your financial opportunities and what you pass down in your legacy is going to be greater than mine. And the only reason I make less than you is because of the color of my skin.
Thank you. Okay, Mike Goodman asks, I came late, but I was curious as to why you focused on Oxford specifically. Sandy, maybe that's you. I don't know, or Pat. I don't know.
Well, because that's where we are. I mean, we're focused on the thing we can influence. I think we can influence on a local level more easily than a wider level. So as the commission is a city commission, so it focuses on the city police department. I mean, there's other work going on in other places. I mean, you know, I for one am on the NAACP's state committee for police and criminal justice reform. So there's work being done on different levels in different municipalities, different counties, et cetera. But our job is to make Oxford the best place it can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's it. We're trying to, you know, often if it's out there, it's away from you, you think you have no responsibility or nothing to do about it. Well, I can't do anything. But if we focus locally, that's where we can really make the difference. And it does make a difference if we think about what happens locally. So I'm asking us to think about first here, and then as was mentioned, doing something like this in a small city might actually provide some ways for other cities to learn. So we hope we can do a good job with that.
Okay, good. The next question is from Linda Kimball, and she would like to know what percentage of the City of Oxford budget goes to the police department. I don't know who knows that. Maybe Chief Jones. I'm looking at you, but
Also,
you may not.
But considering that Chief Jones actually works for the police department, he also probably knows the answer to that.
Yeah, I don't know if I know specifically the answer to that, but you know, our budget's about $4 million, and that includes mostly personnel, and it includes things like animal control, some of our parking, although that's a separate fund as well. It includes our dispatch contract with Butler County Sheriff's Office. So there's many different things, you know, and now this year with our separate building, it includes a lot of those building expenses. So the budget information is all found on the city website under finance and utilities. I think in front of me here, I see something, and I don't want to misquote it, but I see like 47% of just the general fund goes to police. But folks, the budget's complicated. That's not 47% of all the monies in the city. That's 47% of the funds that are shared by departments. So there's other funds such as the fire and EMS fund, the parking fund, the water and sewer fund. So budgeting is not my strong suit. That's why we have a finance department, and I would refer questions to them.
Okay, makes sense. An anonymous attendee wants to know, why is there only one person of police background on the review panel?
I think that's an easy answer. All the commissions and boards in Oxford, to get on them, you have to apply to city council, and then city council approves the appointments of people. If you talk to Doug Elliott, the city manager, he will tell you it's very difficult to get citizens to give up time to be on boards and commissions, and there are quite a few of them in Oxford. So when this commission was formed, you know, word was put out, the commission's formed, looking for people, and you know, people applied to get on it, and then the city council themselves picked the 7 people to be on it. I think the person with the police background might have been the only person of the number of people who applied who had police background. If no one applied with police background, we can't have anybody with police background on there. So it's a matter of going through the process of applying, sending it to the city council, and then they approve people being on it. And then as people went off, you know, people heard about vacancies, they paid attention to the city website and applied, and then they got on. So, you know, I see we got 40 some people listening in, and we had a number of people at some of our meetings listening in. Hopefully some of those people, as people go off our commission in the future, keep an eye out for when there's an opening and apply to be on it. And I think it doesn't matter what your background is to get on it. I think there are limitations that, you know, the lieutenant's wife or the lieutenant's husband can't be on it. If they're an employee of the police department, might be the only limitation there. But other than that, please apply. There will be openings in the future.
Okay, we do have a lot of people here tonight. We had 48 attendees, now we have 47. There are 7 panelists, so we have a lot of questions. Liz Wodel would like to know if township police are addressing any of the Black Lives Matter concerns. I'll hand that to you, Nicole, if I may.
So at the moment, do you mean as in like Butler County?
Township police, she said. I think it's like Oxford Township.
Okay. I'm gonna assume so. We're currently working, yeah, we're just kind of working with the community, but yeah, I haven't heard anything personally, and I'm seeing some like head shakes, so I don't think so at the moment. That's been something we've been trying to do. We have like a Butler County outreach subgroup currently, but with how scheduling is right now, there's nothing like tangible at the moment.
I do want to say something with regard to township. When this commission was first formed, we had a big public meeting in October of 2016 at the Lane Library. It was pretty new then, and it was really well attended. And there was a story about the commission then in the Oxford Press. And where I work on campus, I was working early one morning, and there was a gentleman who was a custodian there, I think has since retired. Older white gentleman who came into my office. He closed his door softly behind him, and he said, "Are you on that new police commission?" And I said, "Yes." I was surprised he knew about that. That's when he told me he had read about it in the Free Press. And he said, "Yeah, I recognized your name because, you know, I clean your office." And then he said, kind of nervously, he said, do you do anything with the township police?" And I said, "No, it's just this Oxford City Commission." And he kind of looked down and he said, "Oh." I said, "Why?" And he had some concerns himself. He said something about, you know, younger officers being different than the older officers used to be and what have you. I think it's important to think about the need for these commissions. And again, usually what drives that is issues with the Black community. But, you know, for an older white man close to retirement to kind of broach with me a desire to have something for the township police, I think speaks to the fact that there are different kinds of people within communities, rural communities, who I think could benefit from having some kind of police community relations commissions or review commission. You know, it's race, it's class, it's so many other things. But I think if we normalize people who are different talking about their concerns, I think we'll get more traction sort of societally for this kind of commission.
Yeah, Nicole, I think it's important for everyone in Oxford to realize that Oxford Township Police have authority to police within the city limits. And then they also police the township unincorporated areas. I don't think they've been approached. I'm sure they're very aware of what's going on. They have very few full-time officers. Most of their officers are part-time, you know, $12 an hour officers. It probably would not be bad for your Butler County group to reach out to the township trustees and see if you could attend the meeting and talk with them about policing. I don't think Chief John Giacomo, is still Chief Goings out there? I don't think he would mind you bringing your concerns to them because it is a layer of policing that does have power within our city limits. And a lot of students also, you know, travel through the townships.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Brad.
Yeah, can I speak to that?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah. So I think that's important, and I think that's kind of one of my frustrations as the city police department is all this attention on the city police department when I feel like we have a highly trained, we spend more money on training for our officers than I think neighboring police agencies. And the township, as Pat said, you know, is comprised of part-time officers who do this. I don't want to say as a hobby, but I'm not trying to disparage their officers, but when you have an officer who comes through a training program like we have, 40 hours a week with an FTO for 16 weeks long, I think you get a better product. And there are resource limitations, obviously, but I think that's a bigger conversation to have regarding policing. Where I live right on the edge of the city limits. I live in the city limits, but my neighbor right beside me is in the township. And then as you go a few houses of township, then you get back to the city. So those are some kind of reforms that I think should be talked about at a level higher than me. Is why are Oxford police are driving by these township houses, but if they call 911, they get a township police officer who may be on the other side of the township when an Oxford police officer could be there quicker. And I think honestly just delivers a better product. That's not to say that the township police don't deliver a good product. And if you have a complaint, you can take that to township trustees. But, a lot of the things we're talking about, I will say I appreciate that the Black Lives Matter group kind of reworded some of their proposals to make them more specific to Oxford and things we can work with, like business cards, because initially I was getting emails that were clearly just the same national agenda about defunding the police. And that's been reformed into actual manageable things that I think can help Oxford. But if we're going to talk about police reform and how we police our communities, I don't think we can ignore the township issue and then also how we work with Miami University. So, and that's like I said, we're not going to solve that tonight, but I just wanted to throw that in there since it's been brought up. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, we're going to try some live talking again. Jack Southard, you have been asked to unmute.
Yes.
Yes, hi.
It actually is going to be Sally Southard, since we're all sitting here together.
Okay, go ahead, Sally.
I'm most appreciative for this forum. I've really learned from each of you, and I had the privilege of serving with Vanessa Cummings and with John Jones. I really see that what the league is bringing is something that all citizens need to be considering. We've gone through 9 weeks of learning with Chautauqua Institute on so many of the issues that you're talking about now. And I see that the importance that Oxford, as small as it is looking at an issue that is perhaps much smaller than the national issues, but it really is where you can nip it in the bud and cause college students to see that they are as much a part of the growth of what they need to be knowing of their citizenship responsibilities in the future. And I truly hope that through our schools that Pat is working to be leading, we will be learning what further we can do. And I thank you so much.
If I can add one thing too, I was listening. I think it's always when we have these people that we talked about, like a complaint card or something, I think it would be beneficial if whatever is distributed for people to respond to, that they can check off that this can be a positive comment. I would think rather than focus, certainly we should get where there's a complaint, but if I can have a good experience with an officer, I would like to be able to kind of feel I could report that too. And it would be good. I would be good for the, yeah, John, when you could show something to X and Y, Z officer that, yeah, this was really well received, like when they came and got me out of my locked car with I would have wanted to have said that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you both. Let's see. We have written questions, 10 of them. The first one is from Jill, and it's, what do you mean by a white supremacist nation?
Yeah. So basically, when I say white supremacy, I mean, by definition, The belief that white people are superior to those of all other races, especially the Black race, and should therefore dominate society. So the history of policing in the United States is directly tied to slavery and the dominance and control of people of color, notably Black people. That's why when we talk about police reform, it is important to address how racism and oppression is embedded in the foundation of policing, as we can't make effective change without doing so. So I hope that helps, I guess, explain that more.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Is data of charges, this is an anonymous question, is data of charges being documented along with race data? It would seem the implication here is that non-Black people get a pass on traffic violations.
I can answer that for you. So yeah, that's actually most of the data. If you go to the PCRRC website, that's what you're going to see is citation data, arrest data, and the race data associated with that. So we do document that. As far as the implication there, I'm not sure what they mean. So, but yes, that data is all documented and it's all available on our website.
Okay, good. Let's see. We have a question from Jenny Fisher. Chief Jones has stated that we need useful data to get useful results. Will there be any effort to analyze sexual assault or rape data as a separate data set? Last year, the amount of sexual violence in our community was overwhelming and involves victims at their most vulnerable. How victims of sexual violence are treated by police, including bias, seem relevant to this conversation.
I can start with this since, so within BLM Oxford, in addition to being a co-leader, I am also a part of the Miami University Relations subgroup. And one of the things that we are working on is getting a Women Helping Women representative. For those who don't know, Women Helping Women is specifically a community-based organization that helps with incidents like sexual assault and interpersonal violence cases and getting people the resources that they need. And we are working on getting, they are based out of Cincinnati, and we are working on getting someone specifically a representative within MUPD, and then seeing if we could also get someone in OPD to specifically handle or at least assist with sexual assault and interpersonal violence cases, since yes, it is very overwhelming in our community. So we are currently working on that. If anyone would like to add anything.
I know Women Helping Women was one of the first groups that the PCRRC brought in to talk to the commission and Chief Jones. And, you know, the hope was we could get them to work with the Oxford Police Department. I'm not sure how viable the group is in Oxford, whether they have any representatives here now or not. But that is one of the things we brought up, and it's on actually a list of agenda items for our next year to revisit that and kind of see where the OPD is with that. So I'm glad that someone else is thinking along those lines also, because I think that's an issue where I'm sure Chief Jones will tell you that the officers' training is so important in dealing with the victim.
Yeah, as far as data related to that, you know, we obviously collect data on those cases. I think more importantly than aggregate data, though, is the quality in which we handle those and making sure that we handle those cases appropriately. So we do work with Women Helping Women on those and other advocacy agencies. So and our detectives in particular are pretty highly trained when it comes to handling a sexual assault. So I guess, Jenny, if there's something specific you're looking for, you know, shoot me an email and I'll see if that's something we collect.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Linda Kimball, and that is on what authority are police policies and procedures based?
I suppose that's for me.
Yeah, I think so.
What authority are police policies and
On
procedures?
what authority?
So the authority would come from the state of Ohio, the Ohio Revised Code, and the Ohio Peace Officer Training Commission, who certifies police officers. I think maybe to get more to our question, I think what we try to do is use policies that reflect best practices, and that's there's a lot of model policies out there through certification agencies like CALIA. Currently, we are not a CALIA agency. That involves a large expense, and I think many years ago they looked into doing that for the Oxford Police Department, and that never happened. That's a national accreditation. What we do is we base our policies on the best practices through the Ohio Collaborative, and they've set out some standards, and most of our policies meet that. But that's something that's important. And with, like I said, with a small staff, it's hard to stay up to date on, when you look at how large our policy manual is, and all the policies to go through, to stay up to date on those as trends change and evolve is difficult. And so there's a program that I've put in called Lexipol that I would like to purchase. That's a capital expense, and that'll be coming up in the city council budgeting sessions. But I think Lexipol is a product that is widely used across the nation, and it keeps your policies up to date. It does training on them. It quizzes officers on them. And while we've tried to do this ourselves over the years, this is something that I think would be helpful. But then again, it comes down to resources and how much are you going to spend on those type of programs. So, but I hopefully that answers Linda's question.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we have John Detheridge who would like to talk. So I'm asking to unmute you, John. Can you unmute yourself? You may have to go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and hit the microphone in order to unmute yourself. Okay, let us come back to you. We have a few more written.
Actually, he's unmuted.
Oh, okay.
I think you've unmuted Jack Southard.
Well, I'll mute you. John, I think you are unmuted as well.
Is that?
Okay. I'm going to mute you. So we have a couple questions from Anonymous. There's a population question. How many white people and how many Black people currently live in Oxford? And specifically to Chief Jones, how many Black people were arrested and charged with crimes in Oxford in the last 12 months? And how many white people were arrested and charged in the last 12 months? And looking at it statistically, are Blacks proportionally arrested and charged with crimes more than would be expected based on their demographic representation? I think Vanessa addressed some of that, but at any rate, I'll turn it over to you, John, since I think most of this question is targeted to you.
Sure. Well, I think when you ask that question of how many live in Oxford, I think that's a very timely question since we're going through the 2020 census. And I think we all see the challenges with what's happening when we try to collect that census data, and are we getting a complete count? If you go to the website for the PCRRC, you can see all that data that was just asked. I don't memorize that data, and I can't get on my computer while I'm on this Zoom call to check it out. So that data is all available. I think the 2010 census data might be on there as well, which talks about, I think the Black population was about 4.5% in Oxford, something of that nature. So, and again, when we talk about data, this will be something that we talk with the PCRRC with. You got to really be careful using census data as your benchmark with what you compare your citation data to or your traffic stop data to, because census data is who lives in your community. And quite frankly, as a police officer, I deal a lot more with people who don't live in my community, it seems. So people passing through my community, someone coming into the community to commit a crime. So there's other benchmarks out there that you can use. That's one of the things we're reviewing. One of the things like we're seeking. There's different windshield surveys that can be done. If we had, interns and college students, that might be something we look at. But yeah, that data is all on the PCRRC website on the cities.
Okay.
I'll just add something really quickly to that yes, I mean, I have it here, but I'd like to get people comfortable with going to the website to look for information. One of the things to keep in mind with arrest and citation data is that sometimes if the same person's arrested multiple times, that's factored into the data as well. So it's not necessarily individual, like each arrest is a different individual. And then sometimes, depending on why they were arrested or stopped, there may be multiple citations applied to the same arrest. So those details are kind of factored in those numbers as well.
If we could put the, I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but we could put the link to your website up on our Facebook page following this session so that people can find the information on their own.
And I was just going to say, it's very easy I just use my phone to navigate it to it. So it's very easy to find by going to the cityofoxford.org webpage and then going down to the boards and commissions and selecting that commission that you want to look up information on. And then it has data reports and annual reports, and you can select that and find all the data you need. So those of y'all that are tech savvy, you just followed that. Those that didn't, go to cityofoxford.org and dig down for boards and commissions and just go from there. But it is
organized well, I agree. Thanks, Vanessa. Okay, it's 8:20 and we've got it's 8:18 and we have a few more questions. Jill says, is there any information given to new Miami students through orientation that spells out how to handle the police, particularly with the number of foreign students?
That's something the commission's working on right now. It's called a Know Your Rights pamphlet. So we're working on that with the police department and hope to get that so it's got accurate and good information that people can use about your interactions with the police. We're in the process of working on that right now. We looked at a draft of it at our last meeting. And then we also at the last meeting talked about providing that in different languages, particularly Chinese, because of the number of Chinese students whose understanding of American policing may be very different. They may not really understand a lot about American policing. So we talked about having a translation of that. But that right now is a work in progress. So hopefully we'll get that out and maybe have it ready when all the students return if that happens.
All right, thank you. A new questioner, Megan Kuykendall, says, Chief Jones, you mentioned having or needing to have people to help analyze the data. Do you currently offer internships or other programs to get students to help you do this work? I imagine some of the delay in reporting may be due to data collection and sorting, so why not use our student population, especially graduate students, needing that internship experience?
Sure, that's a we do have internships with the police department. In fact, past interns are the ones who helped us create the traffic stop data collection spreadsheets. We do have a very valuable resource right here with Miami University. And we also like to help engage with the students and provide those opportunities to them, which is probably why we're so open with journalism students. They come in, we see that as a method of training for them, training for us, good experiences. In the same with, sociology, criminology students. So we do have some interns. We've used them in some of that data, but I think there's other opportunities to use them to do some things like that. So I think that's something we'll explore moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we're getting down to the end. We're going to allow Linda Kimball to talk. Linda, I'm asking you to unmute yourself.
I just did.
Great.
Thank you. I had to raise my hand because there's a caveat and a scathing critique of Lexipol as a corporation that provides the smaller police departments in that may not have the resources to keep their own policy manuals updated. It's a scathing critique because of its policy directives, which many cities, even larger cities, have adopted. And it's an article that was in the September-October issue of Mother Jones. And I would like to, because this is not the time and place to go into it, but I'd like to make sure that each of you has a copy of this. I'm concerned about Lexipol as a source of updating your policies and procedures manuals, and the explanation is in this article, which is written by lawyers, and I'd like to make sure you have copies.
Okay, thank you. Anyone want to? No? Okay. Thank you for your question. We have a number of questions from Anonymous. The first one is statistics through the OPD that show, are there any statistics through OPD that show issues of racism as having been a problem in the year you collected data?
I think it, sorry, John, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think you can answer as well, Pat. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you'd have to go back and look at the data and realize that we're dealing with 2010 census numbers, and now we're in 2019, 2020. And the numbers have to be off so much, and Oxford's kind of a small sample. And I'm not a statistician, but I think statisticians could probably come up with a better answer. I do think Amber mentioned something earlier about, at least in 2010, we were 4.5% Black, and officer-initiated traffic stops in the last year that we got data were 11%. I think that's something that maybe you could delve into, or we could delve into further. But other than that, the data we've collected, there's been nothing that, in my opinion, and I'm not a statistician, that has jumped out at me as indicating a serious problem. The thing Amber mentioned, I think, is something we could look into further.
Okay, anyone else, Chief?
Sure. Yeah, no, I would agree with Pat. I mean, that's some of the problems, and how do you analyze data and really dig deep? But I'm going to once again point out that the traffic stop data, where there was 11%, was not complete data, and it was only for a few months of 2020. So until we get to the end of 2020, we need to go back and, like I said, junk in, junk out. So what we found is we have an auditing process for capturing that data. We go back through, we spend considerable time going back through all the calls, and where we find that an officer didn't turn in the sheet for that call, then we follow up and go collect that data. So it was very incomplete. I simply shared it with PCRRC to let them know this is how we're doing this process. And if and that data is not on the website because it's incomplete data.
I wanted to add something too. When we talk about possibly seeing disparities or bias, it's not. The implication is not that it's deliberate, right? That's what implicit bias is all about. And so one of the things, if you want to Google the Ohio Collaborative on Policing, they have several standards that they've put out. And in 2017, they released, it was February of 2017, they released their standard on non-biased policing. And one of the things that they said was they wanted officers to collect data, and the only data that they mandated that officers collect, that departments collect, was the officer-initiated traffic stop. But part of what they mentioned is that if there is a pattern of bias found, and of course it needs to be a pattern, right? So we know that Chief Jones said this first set of data isn't complete, and 1 year is not necessarily a pattern, but it's something to pay attention to, that they asked that departments address that bias if it's found. And so one of the things that I have to accept is that if they put that in the standard, the expectation that departments address the bias, they must have expressed ways to do that, right? The possibility that it can be addressed and it can be rectified if it's found. So none of this is about deliberate or intention, but just trying to pay attention to see if there might be some implicit biases at play.
Okay, thank you. Couple more questions. We're about out of time. Has Oxford City Council officially responded to the letter of police reform suggestions submitted by Black Lives Matter?
So we presented to words. So we presented the letter on August 4th, and then it was passed over to PCRRC. So now I believe it's getting passed back over to City Council, if that's what the plan is. So they haven't officially voted on it yet. They've just heard and looked at the recommendations, but there hasn't been an official, I guess, voting process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the PCRC took it up at our last meeting. We also had other things on the agenda. We got through the first two of the three proposals, and this is going to be presented to City Council then tomorrow. So we'll give them sort of our recommendations on the first two proposals. The first one was a formal vote of, this is a recommendation. The second, I think there was more of an understanding of progress being made in the direction that the police department, the PCRRC wanted to go. And so we got through the first two of the proposals, the reporting and the giving out the card, making complaints a little easier. We did not get to the third proposal, which is pretty much re-envisioning how society deals with problems instead of always dumping them on the police. That's how I look at that proposal. We're going to take that up at our next meeting. We're probably going to have a next meeting this month on September 17th. And the only thing on the agenda will be the third proposal of Black Lives Matter. Unless City Council tomorrow night tells me that, no, we don't need to do that. But otherwise, we will take up their third proposal. We just ran out of time in our meeting. It was 9:30 and I thought people had put in enough time.
Okay, thank you, Pat. I'm going to hand it back to Sandy to wrap up. We're at 8:29. The only thing that I have to say is I've been asked to announce that the 19th Amendment History Project continues at Oxford Community Arts Center through October 4th. And if you haven't gone up to see it, please consider doing so. Sandy, I'll turn it over to you.
You're muted,
I was
Sandy.
muted, yes. I was trying to play. No, thanks everybody for participating on the panel, and thank you everybody for listening in. And I want to follow up with what was said at the end here, that everybody who is concerned and interested, please keep your interest high. And as Vanessa mentioned, those of you that would like to continue talking about this, there's certainly the opportunity at the commission's meeting on the 17th to participate. Just yours, it's open just like this meeting has been, correct? And those of you who are interested, email anyone, any panelist. This is going to be an issue that we continue to pay attention to. And we're glad that there was, well, 48 attendees. So we consider that quite a success. I hope you learned a lot from this meeting, and keep up the information coming from the League and from the Interfaith Center at Miami and NAACP. Thank you very much. And Chief Jones, you ended up having to answer most of the questions, and we appreciate it greatly.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.